Hi, welcome to the Funding Blueprint Unlocking Startup Success, presented by StartHub. I'm Cody Goff, and today you're going to learn what grinds an investor's gears. I'm talking to someone who is involved in VC funding in educational technology, and he's going to walk you through how VCs evaluate pitches from EdTech startups, and then he's going to let loose on what not to do in your pitches. You'll walk away with a better understanding of how to stand out in a competitive space to get the funding you need. My guest is Calvin Stewart. Calvin is deeply involved in EdTech funding and is involved with multiple projects right now. That includes his role as an investor at the VC firm Odinata Ventures, which is committed to investing in technology-enabled education companies. And he's also serving on the advisory board of a pre-seed startup called Rayon, which helps connect founders, developers, and investors in the startup community to one another. Calvin is based in Los Angeles. One quick programming note before we go to the interview. This is the last episode we are releasing in 2023. It's December, so I'm going to take a break and recharge my batteries. You should go spend some time with family and loved ones and do the same thing. We'll be back in 2024 with brand new episodes. More on that later, but for now, here's my conversation with Calvin. I asked with him to share with me a particularly impactful funding moment that he's experienced in his time as an investor. And here's what he told me.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, I think for some context on this, it'd be useful to understand sort of what VCs look at when they're looking at companies. I think that there's no real secret ingredient to get you to the finish line when it comes to funding. I think it's really a combination of a lot of factors. When looking at the company itself, probably the most important thing is VCs are looking for disruptors. Venture capital is one of the riskiest asset classes out there. The startup ecosystem is truly unforgiving. And there's some statistics out there that something like 40% of all venture-backed startups will lose all the money that was invested in them and return zero to VCs. 75% will lose between all of the money and, a couple dollars for VCs. So they're really looking for that top 25% to, really make money off of. They're looking for home runs. And I think that, they're really looking for the most disruptive companies because they have the greatest opportunity to become some of these home runs. Beyond the company, looking at founders, personally, I really like gritty founders. I like founders who are sales focused and who are really just ready to get out there and be scrappy, make sales. And a specific instance of this would be at Rayon. So the founder of Rayon, the CEO, this guy named Lawrence Cohen, was a great guy. He's very sales focused. He's very driven. Just from my conversations with him, I could immediately tell that this is the kind of guy who, if push came to shove, he could, tighten his belt buckle another notch and pull himself up by his bootstraps. He doesn't need the VCs, right? And I think that, of course, VCs are great for scaling, right? Not every startup needs venture backing, but if you want to have access to capital quickly and you don't want the debt obligations of loans and things like that, it's definitely worth it.
You mentioned sales-focused founders. So does that mean the ability to sell themselves or product? Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, both are important, certainly, on different sides of the equation. Being able to sell yourself is really important for investors, especially at the earlier stages. But being able to sell your product is, absolutely critical. A lot of startups, get their first foot in the door of their industry through founder sales. And, even startups that are, getting into the Series A range still rely, heavily on founder sales because these people know their company, they can explain it the best. And hiring somebody new, you do your seed round, you get $500,000 or $1 million, you hire a sales team. They're not going to be able to immediately, hit the ground running, right? In nearly the same capacity that you were. And just even when talking with clients, if you are the CEO, they take it like a bit more seriously than if you're just some, sales representative essentially at the company.
No, that's really interesting. I like that insight about the sales-focused founders. So my next couple questions kind of go hand in hand. Why did you choose EdTech specifically, and what is it that you look for in a strong EdTech startup? Whether it's the same as other startups or different.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, for why I entered into the EdTech space, it was where I got my foot in the door with venture capital. I always knew that I wanted to invest in VC. But I think beyond that, really what appeals to me in the sector is, the impact. I think education is, of course, the great equalizer. I also went through college during the pandemic and saw some of the growing pains associated with, new technological adoption in the space. And I think that because of this, the many facets of the education system have really remained unchanged in the past 100 years. And I think that we're overdue to see, some, disruption and revolution in the industry. I mean, if you look at the US and K-12, class engagement, math and reading learning levels, international education rankings, mental health, they're all down, as you continue getting into the younger and younger generations. And even beyond that, more students are applying to college. It's becoming harder and harder to get into the school that you want. Schools like NYU, I believe, had a less than 10% acceptance rate this year, which is crazy. When I was applying, it was more like 35, 40. And, I just feel like, even after college as well, these students, it's very difficult to get the jobs that they want. And I think that every aspect of this, lifelong learning value chain from pre-K all the way through workforce development is due to be disruptive. And I think it's a really exciting time to be in EdTech in that regard. In terms of what makes a good EdTech investment, so it is a crowded space. There are a lot of educators who turn into founders, and there are lots of smart people in the industry making similar products, or at least products that solve similar problems. And to be successful in the space and get funding, especially from capital gains focused funds, not impact funds, it really, to me, comes down to being able to explain in plain English what you do and why it's valuable. Like the value proposition is, in my opinion, the most important piece of information sort of across all sectors, across all stages of development. Because if you aren't able to articulate your value proposition to investors, you are probably going to be able to articulate it well to customers. And then it's this positively reinforcing loop that if you can't get customers, you can't get investors, you can't get investors, you can't get customers, and you're stuck. And I think that, a really good pitch should tell the VC, three things, as fast as possible, as early in the pitch as you can. So, what do you do? Why do I care about that? And why do I believe you? So, like an example of this, one of the companies that we looked at had a pitch that was similar to, what if I told you that we could produce batteries at twice the power density, at half the cost, without any, environmentally harming solvents that, traditionally battery manufacturing processes use. That's an amazing, amazing start to a pitch. It tells me what you do. You make batteries. Why I care? Because you do it better than everybody else. And after that, you just have a sentence about we're currently running pilots with, cattle and 3 of the other biggest battery manufacturers in the world. And that tells me why I should believe you, because these people who it's their industry, right, are piloting your service. And I think that those are the kind of the 3 points that I would love to see more often from startup founders at the beginning of their pitches. Because it really, captures your attention. And, often as well, when startup founders are pitching to VCs, when startup founders are pitching to VCs on the initial pitches, they're going to be talking with the junior members of the team. They're going to be talking with the analysts and the associates, right? And then from there, the workflow generally goes that the analysts and associates continue diligence on the company. They do more research, and then maybe a couple weeks later, maybe a month later, they're doing some initial pitching of your company to the actual decision makers at the firm, the partners, the investment committee. And if you aren't able to explain, very clearly and memorably what you do, it's going to be very difficult to the analysts. It's going to be very difficult for those analysts to explain that to the partners. And I think that that's also, important to remember that, understand who you're talking to. VCs often do not have, deep technical expertise in the sectors that they're looking at. So, bringing it back to plain English is really helpful for, getting funding, for sure.
Hey, I want to follow up on what you said about the kind of industry recognition in a way, like making a new battery manufacturers are checking it out. That's good. But when you're a disruptor, when you're a disruptor, you're kind of necessarily going against the grain of the industry. Like, I wouldn't imagine Uber had a lot of shining reviews from taxi cab companies or Airbnb.
Certainly not.
Exactly right. The hotels probably weren't thrilled about Airbnb. So is there a way to kind of prove out the hypothesis for a really disruptive technology like that?
Yeah. There's a lot of, there's a ton of ways to provide credibility. I mean, of course, sales is the most obvious, right? Like if you're doing good sales and your customers like you, that's also compelling for, why I, believe that you're telling me the truth, basically. But beyond sales, there's a lot of other metrics as well that you can look at. Like you can look at, like if it's a platform, you can look at their retention versus their churn. You can look at, there's a million different things that can provide backing, but that's just one example for sure.
Yeah. Glad that we cleared that up. So different ways to prove your value, but proving it's really good.
Yeah.
In the EdTech space, that is broad. You mentioned it, like K through 12, right? And even continuing education, industry, professional education. Are there particular areas that are more crowded than others or more ripe for disruption than others?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think that the areas that are typically the most crowded, from what I've seen, mostly center around K-12 and curriculum. There's a lot of interest there. And I think, some of that comes from the nature of the businesses often in that space. So a lot of ed techs are B2B or business to government, or, like a lot of them aren't B2C or like customer facing startups. And, the venture capital model works particularly well, for a lot of these SaaS companies, companies that aren't going to have a lot of overhead aside from marketing, sales, and headcount. There's going to be some development, presumably, but for these companies, I think it's definitely important.
What is the most common problem that you see when a startup walks in the door and they say, "Hey, we could use some funding," and then you go, "No, that's not going to happen"?
Yeah, I mean, so there's definitely like a few like archetypes of founders that you don't love seeing. You see them all the time, but it's there's nothing against these people, but if you listen to hundreds of pitch decks, you start hearing the same sort of things. One type of founder that I would say is not the best to probably, put your money behind is the perfectionist, right? Like a founder who's not willing to launch their product because it's not perfect yet. Creating a company, especially a startup, is an iterative process, right? You have to, nobody has a crystal ball and they can't see the future. So the best way to understand where you deliver real value is to actually go out there and see what your customers are saying and see, where your pain points are. And I think that, the perfectionist is definitely one type of founder that, if you are a perfectionist, try to just like get your products out there, and, really start, creating a story around them. Like, oh yeah, we launched and then, we saw this success, or, oh, and we weren't really getting the traction we wanted. So we pivoted towards this model, or, just like not just sitting on your product is very important. So like constantly trying new things and iterating. Another type of founder, an archetype of founder that I see a lot is the super optimist, especially when it comes to cash flow projections. It's definitely something that I didn't like seeing at the end of a deck. If I really love the company, love what they were doing, and then they show me their model at the end, and they're going from 1.3x growth this year to 8x the next year and 12x the year after that. And, while there are startups that this is the case, 99.9% don't do this. And I think that, it's definitely a headache for me when I see those numbers, because I know that they're coming up in the investment committee. I know that I'm going to have to try to defend those numbers, and if I want the deal to get passed, and often they're like pretty much indefensible. So I think that, definitely like the optimist is is not the best. You want to be more of a realist. You don't want to be a pessimist, but you want to be more of a realist in your projections. And also, I think this just helps after you get funding as well. Like if you're projecting you're going to bring in $500,000 in funding, and then suddenly you're going to go and you're going to 8x your revenue the next year, and you don't, and you're spending capital on the sales team and marketing and everything like you are going to hit these revenue figures, you're in a bad place if you don't, right? So I think that, that's definitely another area for sure that we see some founders that, definitely aren't doing exactly what we want them to. But, and then finally the last, and this is like the, it's kind of hard to describe them. I would say the fibber, the archetype of the fibber. It's not, I don't believe it's malicious or intentional, but you hear the same sort of things from a lot of companies. And often it's not that it's not true, but it's, it's like misleading what they're saying. I mean, a lot of times companies will say, we have conservative projections, and, they don't, right? And, it's not an immediate, red flag. We're not going to invest, but, don't love hearing that. We have conservative projections, and then I look and they're, wild. Another common sort of fib, I would say, is that they're, 1 or 2 weeks away from signing a huge contract with Walmart or some other household name company, because also, it's not real until it's actually in the books, right? Until you actually sign it. Like talking about your pipeline and your pitch is great, but there have been several founders that have, I believe tried to mislead us a bit with with their pipeline. And then, another lie that you hear a lot is around the market. It has to do with the their capturing of the market. You often hear, we'll have 100 million, 50 million in annual recurring revenue if we can just capture 1% of the total market. But, that's nice to say, right? But it's more valuable to explain how you're getting there than just saying what it is. And, also, of course, most startups, I would say, 80% don't really cover their competitors, particularly in earlier stages. They don't really touch on their competitors at all. And they say, we're the only company doing what we're doing. And, I don't really understand, like, a lot of the rationale behind this because, of course, we're going to look up their customers and look up their competitors, and we'll talk with their customers and ask them, were they thinking of using other companies? And, so it's going to come up. I think that for founders, it would be better just to bring it up and say, yeah, these are the people that we compete with, and this is why we're better than them, rather than just saying that we operate alone in this space, and then the VCs have to go, or the junior VCs have to go and say, well, no, they don't. Well, are they better, than their competitors? Why are they hiding this? So yeah, it's a very long-winded answer, but yeah, there's several like archetypes, I would say, of like common, common founders that, you want to look out for. And, a lot of these people just have been, told to say these sort of things, right? From pitch coaches or whoever. So I think, I'd love to tell them that, these things don't matter as much to us. Like sort of similarly, like in the market slides and a lot of pitches, right? The TAM, SAM, and SOM are, in my opinion, just completely arbitrary numbers. Total addressable, service obtainable. They're completely arbitrary, in my opinion. I mean, it seems like startups kind of just pick the biggest number that they can find on Google. And, I feel like I have a few takeaways for like how you should do a market slide. I mean, I think that, you'd be kind of hard pressed to find a tech startup that failed simply because there was not enough space in the market, or the market was not large enough, right? It's their ability to compete in the market that caused them to fail, not the size of the market, right? And like the purpose of this part of your pitch talking about the market is to demonstrate that you understand who your customer is, you understand your positioning, and you understand what the opportunity could look like if you were to scale. Having stuff like your unit economics, your margins, and things like that definitely provide a lot of color. And, I think that, there's definitely some other areas, like I think also problem as well in pitches. The problem slide, it's, traditional or conventional pitch wisdom to start with your problem and then go to your solution. But, for a lot of companies, this is great. If your problem is more abstract, definitely explain it. But if you make a drug that helps cure malaria or like helps people with cancer symptoms, like you don't have to tell me that cancer is a problem. I definitely know, right? It would be much more useful if you lead with the what do you do and why do I care? Because that's what sticks in my mind. It's not like 2 minutes of me kind of sitting there listening to him saying that X amount of people die and it's like a horrible disease. It's like, yes, I definitely get that.
I love your answer. It clearly, like, look, you work in this space. You're the kind of person people want to get money from. So it sounds like you've got some pet peeves. And
yeah, definitely.
that's valuable, very valuable for our listener to hear is like, maybe I should reconsider doing that. I love that some things kind of grind your gears. And it sounds like a big takeaway from what I'm hearing in a lot of your examples is just that they're not giving tangible points of what their business is doing. It's here's what we could do, here's what the opportunities are, but it's not, hey, we did this last week and it produced this and it was sold to this and it made us this and it helped us kind of build and like tangibly like the things that were done, not the pipeline that was built, not the outreach that was started, but like the responses you got and the actual items you produced, like that really getting just black and white and showing that is really where the value is, it sounds like.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think that, there's different lengths of pitches for sure that founders will do to VCs. I think, traditionally the first pitch is going to be, somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes with Q&A. And in those pitches, you can sometimes not cover everything, but if you do, it's useful to have a leave behind deck. So a deck that's, instead of 15 slides, it's more like 40 slides. That way, if there are any questions that come up as I'm working at night and, I can't reach you, the night before I have to pitch or whatever, I can find stuff there and I don't just have to say, yeah, we actually don't know about, this aspect of their business model. Like we have no insight into their pricing or whatever it is.
So you're kind of like the first line of defense, essentially. The startups pitch to you and then you take that, translate, do the analysis and figure out, is this maybe a good investment? And if you think it is, then you then essentially have to re-pitch it to another level. And how many levels of that pitching, how many levels are there within a VC typically?
Yeah. So yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, the junior members of the team, I would say like the vast majority of the time are going to be that first point of contact. They're going to reach out on LinkedIn or through email, set up that initial call, and just get an idea of what you're doing. And I think that in terms of the number of rounds of pitching, it really depends on the company. And like how certain we are. Like I've seen deals that have been passed, just from an initial pitch and then straight to an investment committee because we were just super confident, or we were investing like a very small amount because they were seed, early stage companies that were packed with other VCs or whatever it is. But I think that generally speaking, you're probably going to have to go through at least 3 pitches before the deal gets passed. An initial pitch, and then sort of a deeper dive into the industry. That's when you look at competitors. That's when you look at or speak with competitors. That's when you speak with customers. And then you pitch again, generally in VCs. And then finally, you'll pitch the investment committee where the decision will be made.
So next question, you said you've gone through hundreds of pitches. Are you and the VCs doing a lot of looking around, trying to find them? Or are you just so inundated with startups contacting you that you're just like, I don't even have time to look around. I'll just wait for them to come to me.
Yeah. So I think it definitely depends on the firm, right? And your size and, how much human capital you have to deploy, right? But generally speaking for us, LinkedIn inbound outreach is normally not a good way at the firms that I've been at to reach people. Like everybody's just so busy. Like there will be people that will respond, but certain companies I worked for, we didn't take any inbound outreach into consideration when we were sourcing companies. So we would, it depends on the firm, but we went every month or 2 months, we would, create new interest areas. Then we would split them up amongst the team, and then we would try to find just on Google, who are the leading, most disruptive players in the space. And then we would, try to contact those people. But I would say, inbound to VCs is really hard, because you do get a ton. You get like a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. Once your email gets on Crunchbase or whatever, it starts. You start getting a lot in email as well. But yeah.
Because I was going to ask, I think it's appropriate to bring up this anecdote since you're in the Los Angeles area. I used to be a commercial actor, did some acting gigs in Chicago, and my trick, there was a trick to getting an agent that people shared with me. And because agents just get headshots and acting resumes nonstop. Right? I'm sure in LA it's significantly worse. But here in Chicago, at least, the advice was send it via next day air. Send it like next day express, pay like $20 or $30 to get it, because then they get that special envelope. And instead of sticking it in a pile with all the regular postage envelopes, you got that next day. Is there a trick like that in the VC? Like if a startup sends you a cake or something with their logo on it, like do little tricks like that ever tend to grab your attention?
Honestly, the trick that gets your attention, or most VC's attention, I think the best is just something that they can engage with that isn't going to require them to do something, like require them to do 2 months of work on your company to try to get it passed or things like that, like something like a podcast, right? Like reaching out to people, asking if you have one, or just reaching out to meet with people to talk is a good way. I mean, definitely connections are your best friend in venture capital. As a startup, if you have friends who are startup founders that have been venture backed, use them to get intros to the VCs. I think that warm is going to be, I'm just going to guess, but I'd say 100 times more likely warm intros than cold intros to succeed, and at least like get those initial stages, get a call on the books. But yeah, no, the podcast is kind of like a new way that I think a lot of startups are trying to engage with VCs more. So.
Yeah, that's what we're doing right now. I mean, not explicitly to, make a connection with you, but, we found you and say, this guy's got good experience and knowledge to share with our audience. So there has to be a balance, right? It's not just like, let me invite you random VC person on a podcast with no real purpose or focus and maybe talk to you and call, check a box and call that a day. There's a quality issue. I've worked for a B2B podcast production company, and their whole strategy was just, hey, businesses, work with us and then, book your ideal buyer or whatever as a guest, and then churn out a garbage podcast. Like they made terrible podcasts.
I believe it.
Versus like great ones like this one. Like this is a fantastic podcast.
Yeah, it's very conversational, good questions. It's not like, promotional material, right, for either party, right?
Yes. Thank you for the validation. I'll take it. Speaking of startups, I do want to, before we wrap up, talk about your work with Rayon also, because you're also advising over there. Rayon is a pre-seed startup that connects a community of over 20,000 technical and non-technical founders, developers, and investors to relevant roles and opportunities in the startup community. I'm really curious, 20,000 people in the startup community helping connect them. It's starting to feel like in certain parts of the country, you can't walk 10 feet without tripping over someone in the startup ecosystem. So what problem are you solving? Like, why is it hard for startup talent to find one another?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the problem is that, startups have very limited visibility to investors, corporations, and the talent that they need to grow. I mean, Rayon is doing this through both their matching algorithm on their platform, but also through their in-person events. But it's really hard to find a company that you've never heard of. And, there's a million things that founders could be doing with their time, right? Like, especially at the earlier stages, you're just working, almost investment banking hours, right? But, having something to help optimize the hiring process that's geared not only towards hiring for, workers at your company, but also onboarding potential investors, really could help free up a lot of time to be spent on making more valuable decisions, stuff with sales, things like that. So I think that's sort of the long and short of what the problem is that Rayon is solving.
Yeah, you're right. I actually, the last startup I worked for a couple startups ago, the founder reached out to me on LinkedIn and said, people have approached us about doing a podcast. It looks like you know how to do podcasts. Can we talk? And next thing you know, I had a job, and that was a whole roller coaster, lots of ups and downs, like many startups. But that founder took time out of his day to sit on LinkedIn and go, where can I find somebody that has podcast experience, and go that way? Because it probably wasn't going to put up a job post. Maybe didn't have the resources to pay for a job posting somewhere. These are the kinds of problems that you're helping solve.
Oh yeah. And also, like, online now for finding a job, it's very difficult to, tell who the real talent is often, in things like, it's, just a LinkedIn profile is often not a lot to really get a good idea of, like, was this person, exceedingly good at their job before, do I want them on my team? And I think that having, at least now, there's a bit more of like a personal touch with Rayon. I think that the community is only for, senior business leaders, C-suite, investors, and, high-level officers in startups, essentially. And, I think that because of that, they've really tried to build a company or a community that's, all the cream of the crop. Like, everybody that's on there is exceedingly good in their industry and could provide a lot of value if connected to the right company. So yeah.
I can relate to that because I know many people who have been top performers at their jobs, all of their jobs consistently. And yet once they're on the market, it's impossible to get a hold of anybody. Now, this is kind of a problem though, beyond startups though, isn't it?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think that sort of in all facets of the, now digital recruiting landscape, it's become tough. The jobs that people want, you're going to have a lot of applications for. For instance, if you're looking at, a private equity job anywhere in the US, it's probably going to have 1,000 or 2,000 applicants for one role. So even if you are great, there's a overwhelming chance that you're never going to hear back from them, because there's somebody who's even greater, who's caught their eye. But I think that certainly we've looked at some companies in the space for recruiting, especially like out of college, when these students, if you don't have the right internship background, it's really hard to break into certain industries, like especially in finance. Like, if you want to do investment banking, but you've not done any investment banking and you're trying to get in right after college, it's going to be hard. It's certainly not impossible, but yeah, it's going to be very difficult. And it's a game of numbers. They've made applying to jobs easier than it's ever been, but also more competitive than it's ever been. So
yeah, definitely. Well, I hope that Rayon continues to disrupt the space, and onward and upward for it. People can learn more about Rayon at rayon.io. It's RAION.io. I'll include a link to that in today's show notes, as well as a link to Odonata Ventures if you would like to check that out. And I will give you this opportunity, Calvin, to leave us with any parting words of wisdom that you'd like, and or if you'd like people to follow you somewhere.
Yeah, feel free to shoot me a connection on LinkedIn. I'd be more than happy to connect back. And thanks so much for having me on. It was great talking. It was a really great conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. A lot of really cool actionable takeaways for the EdTech space. We'll keep an eye on it and hopefully speak to you again in the future. But thanks again for joining me, Calvin.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, great talking. Thank you.
Thanks for listening or watching if you're on YouTube or Spotify. As a reminder, this is our last episode of 2023, but I will be back the first week in 2024 with brand new episodes of The Funding Blueprint, Unlocking Startup Success. Follow the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast app to get new episodes for free automatically every week starting in January. In the meantime, you can get your startup conversation fixed by joining our engaged community of entrepreneurs and investors on Discord. There's a link to find that in the description of today's episode. The Funding Blueprint is produced by me, Cody Goff, with audio and video editing by Sean Patel. If you're looking for exceptional sound design or audio-video production work, get in touch with Sean at seanpatel.com. And if you're in the market for a branded podcast consultant, then feel free to email me at cody@academicpodcasts.com. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you in 2024.